Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Paying the Price by Sara Goldrick-Rab, I believe is how her name is pronounced, who is a researcher who's done a lot of work in the financial aid space for college costs. This book is really about how financial aid in America doesn't necessarily match up with the ideals that it was originally set out to provide for as far as low-income students, specifically who are Pell Grant recipients, and she tracks kind of the diminishing power of Pell Grants over time to pay college costs. So that's a large part of what the book is. In order to do that, she focuses in the state of Wisconsin, because in Wisconsin they had what was essentially a lottery. So they have a longitudinal study. In 2008, they had a program start in Wisconsin where some students received, I believe it is $3,500 for full-time students a year if you qualified, if you kind of got in on the lottery essentially. And if you didn't, you obviously didn't get anything. And it was her goal, I think, to track how that amount of money affected graduation rates, and she does that kind of throughout the book. She also interviews 6 students who of various backgrounds to see how the financial aid system affected their ability to finish college. I believe this study goes for about 6 years, from 2008 to 2014. So those are kind of the two main facets of the book. The book also goes into an examination of Milwaukee and how the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee is not as funded as well as the flagship school. She doesn't really touch, in my mind, she didn't get to the granular details of why that is, and she kind of left some of that stuff a little vague, but that's examined. She also, at the end of it, has her call of how she would fix the financial aid system, which I thought was interesting. While I disagree with a lot of her points, I did find it interesting. So the things that I did like about it, I did like the fact that she interviewed these 6 students. They have kind of various backgrounds. One student is a Caucasian male who received a merit-based scholarship, a small merit-based scholarship before going to school. There's one student who was an African-American male who, while he was probably the lowest income student, received, I think, the third most amount in aid due to him not getting a merit-based scholarship, and due to the student who got actually the most financial aid was a male student who was a member of a Native American tribe, indigenous people tribe, who paid for him to go to school, and he essentially got a full ride. And the novel, I keep calling it a novel, the book, tracks these people and kind of shows over time how the financial aid system helped or didn't help them accomplish their goals. There's also three other female students, one of whom wants to be I believe a motivational speaker, one wants to be a veterinarian tech, and the other one, I think her main ambition, her reason for going to school is to be a designer, an art designer, something of that nature. So I thought those were all really interesting. I thought some of the characters, two of the females were kind of interchangeable at times, and she has 6 people, but it was hard sometimes to keep a track of them. I found myself flipping back and forth to see who these people were. For a couple of them, most of them stood out relatively easily, but a couple of them kind of blurred together. My biggest issue with the book is that her calls at the end for things like her solution to fixing the educational system would be paying for college for all students in the United States for at least 2 years. That's ultimately, I think, what she would want to do. She kind of touches around the edges of the financial aid part of it and how financial aid is not cash. And the reason it's not cash is because it's set up in a way where it really benefits students, but it doesn't really work to benefit the student's family. They can't really exchange it for rent and for food and things like that to help other people very easily. And that's kind of one of the safeguards against abuse. She notes that it's really good at that, but then she kind of turns around and says we should actually have less safeguards. So I felt like that was one case where her argument didn't make a lot of sense to me. She also uses certain people to make her points for the system not working, but in my mind, they didn't necessarily do a good job of doing that. In my mind, one of her arguments that she makes, and she has a few assumptions in the book that I don't agree with, and I think that was kind of one of the difficult things in reading the book. One of her assumptions was that everyone needs college, at least a 2-year degree, and she says basically it's not like it was before. Everyone needs some kind of college training. I personally don't agree with that. I work in an industry where people are finding people just working like low jobs or high school equivalency jobs, training them and then turning them into techs. So I've seen that in kind of my own life where that's not necessarily the case. I'm not saying that's everywhere, and can't really speak for Wisconsin, but it's just not a principle I kind of wholeheartedly embrace. There's all the other options. There's the military. There's becoming a salesperson. There's kind of a few other options. I definitely think it's harder today to not get a college degree, but I don't really agree that it's absolutely necessary and that it's something everyone needs. So there's that. And then the other part of it is one of the test examples she gives is this African-American student whose parents are below the poverty line, and he has 4 brothers and sisters that he helps take care of while he's not in school. And his story is he ends up graduating, and he ends up getting a master's degree. And in my mind, it was like, well, he did take on some debt. We don't know how much debt. One of the limitations of the research study that I also found frustrating was that we don't know how much debt the students actually took on. So I can't really sit here and say, well, that made a lot of sense for you or it didn't make a lot of sense for you. If you're coming from a situation where you think that the debt should be 0, then I think you have one viewpoint. I don't necessarily ascribe to that. But I don't know how much debt he has. So if he has a master's degree and he's making $90,000 or however much money he's making, but I can't tell you if his debt level is $50,000 or $100,000, there's going to be slightly different calculations. But his story is he graduated, he got a graduate degree after that, and he's working somewhere, but we don't know, you know. So it's hard for me to sit here and say his story makes sense or it doesn't, but if, like I said, if he's making $100,000 and has $50,000 in debt, for someone who came from crushing poverty, that's not the saddest story in the world for me. So those were kind of some of the limitations and the frustrations of the book. Is there were limitations in the research. The book overall, again, kind of focuses on the Pell Grant and the financial aid system to poor and low-income students and how that system kind of fails them. There's an argument to be made that the system's really not built for people who are below the poverty line to go to college because it's not. A lot of people don't see it as a necessity. And again, she does. If you fall into that camp, then you'll find more things in here, I think, to agree with than I did. And then the other part of it, to me, the biggest missing piece of it doesn't really get touched on in this book because it's not really what the book is about, and I don't fault the author for that. But really, the book ultimately comes down to the issue is why is college 2 or 3 times more expensive than it used to be? So we can kind of quibble with like the purchasing power of the Pell Grant and how much money people should contribute. But if the good being sold is 2 or 3x what it was, to me, the main focus should be on driving that cost down, and we can kind of get into debates about what is paying and who is paying what, and if it makes sense, and if there will be jobs there afterwards, which are all really important things. But the main issue is because it's 2 or 3x times more expensive than it was. So that's really the book. There are a couple of other things in there about private universities, for-profit universities, which she kind of briefly touches on that she's not a big fan of, and I don't have too strong of an opinion about that. But overall, I thought it was an interesting jumping off point. Like I said, I found myself shaking my head and disagreeing with her in a lot of points, but I found it overall kind of an interesting book, so I definitely recommend it to anybody who's interested in learning more about the financial aid system and the history of it and its purchasing power today and the importance for many people. Next week, I'll be reading John Irving's Avenue of Mysteries. Until next time, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on Twitter. I'll leave my Twitter link below. Till next time, bye.